Man, it's rough being a hostage negotiator. You've got all these hostages you need to save. You've got all of these options in how to do it. And worst of all, you have to deal with this poor lady who looks like she's been hit in the face with a bat in slow motion and her face just stuck that way. Seriously, look at that poor lady's face. It really does look like it, doesn't it? Yep, that's the best joke I got for the opening of this one, I'm sorry. So, hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, welcome back to Blue Boards. I'm taking a look at Hostage Negotiator this time, which Shut Up and Sit Down already did, just recently, if you're watching this around the time that it came out, so you're not going to be able to buy this for a few weeks. I do apologize about that. This was legitimately the next game in my queue. I've got a huge backlog of board games to get through now, and this was just next on the list. So, complete and utter coincidence. Great. So, I'm not as even remotely positive on this game as they were. There are some likable elements to it. A couple of things that I would like to explain over the course of this video, so I might as well just do that. But let me just really quickly take you through what a round looks like in this game. So, we start off with our 6 basic cards here, and there's a few things we can do with them. We can play them, and we can roll some dice. And depending on the numbers on the dice, we can get successes or we can just screw it up entirely. So, successes are 5s and 6s. If you land on a 4 and you've still got cards in your hand, you can put 2 of these cards face down in order to turn that into a success. Otherwise, 1s through 3s and 4s are failures. And depending on whether or not you succeed or fail, you will get, if you have 1 success, you do the blue. If you have 2 success, you do the green. It's really that simple. Once you've played out all these cards, or you've decided to hang on to some of them for the next round, you'll move into the buy phase. Some of these cards will give you speech points. Come on, focus. There we go. Some of these cards will give you speech points, and those speech points are used to buy these cards up here. They have varying costs from 1 through to 8, and they have varying strengths as a result. Then all the cards you use get deposited into the shop, and we move to the terror phase, which flips over a card and gives some instructions, which can be either moving this terror track up or down, it can be killing a hostage or rolling to see if a hostage dies, it can be an extra demand, it can be a bunch of different things. And once that terror deck runs out, the game is over. Also, if over half of the hostages die, the game is over. If an abductor escapes, that's it. That's also the end of it. The idea of the game is to get all of these hostages out of the hostage pool. Over half of them have to be saved, because apparently you can have a body count as a hostage negotiator. That's just fine. And you also need to capture or kill the abductor, which is done by freeing 1 more hostage when the hostage pool is empty, or just taking them down, whether it be via the sniper or via a demand or something like that. And it's that simple. You just go through those 3 phases. Play cards, buy cards, terror deck. Play cards, buy cards, terror deck. And that's really all there is to it. There are a couple of other minor mechanics, like if the terror meter here comes all the way down here, you get more dice to roll. If you can push it even further past the S, you'll save more hostages. If you can push it even further past the, or if they push it even further past the K, the hostages will start getting themselves killed. And you've also got some demands up here. And demands, you're going to want to reveal them, because there are certain cards in the deck, like right now, that will actually increase the threat level depending on whether or not there's an unrevealed demand. And you can reveal demands by playing this particular card here. What are your demands? And succeeding, at which point those demands will be revealed. And those demands, they usually cost a bit, and they usually give you a big benefit, but they also come with a downside. All of the escape demands usually end with, this will be your last turn before they can escape. And all of the major demands will have some kind of secondary effect. Like this one, for example, resolve an additional red terror card during each terror phase. So basically the game goes twice as fast. And that's really it for the base mechanics. The expansions add a lot of mechanics, but we're not talking about the expansions right now. We're talking about the base box. And here's the thing about the base box and the 3 abductors that you get with it. You get Arcanye, you get Edward, and you get Donna. And they're all very similar to each other. And as a result, all of the same strategies usually end up working with them. Now, there is a bit of randomness in there because the Terror deck is not pre-formed. You have a pile of 20 cards, and you shuffle them, and you draw 10, and that makes you red Terror, so there's always a little bit of a difference there. And then you've also got a final event that determines the final turn of the game, which usually changes things up significantly, but you want to try and avoid getting near that as much as possible. But all of the three base ones you have here work basically the same way. Donna and Arcanye, they work roughly the same way, except that Donna has more hostages, starts a little bit calmer, and kills people if you roll double ones, or saves them if you roll double sixes, which is a little weird. And then Edward is the more interesting of the bunch, because if you manage to get the threat meter all the way to the K, he just kills everybody and runs for it, which is an interesting little twist on the gameplay, but it's not really enough to make him too different. You just need to put a little bit more emphasis on the calming him down side of things. But here's the thing that I didn't like that much about this game. It's that half the game seems to be learning the strategy, and there are some games that you can argue that this is a thing with. Friday is one of them, but Friday I didn't feel it too badly. In this one, if you don't understand certain kinds of strategy, you're not going to get anywhere. So let me just give you some of the basic tips that you would need to survive a game of Hostage Negotiator. The first would be to reveal demands as soon as possible for more than one reason, because once you reveal both demands, I should say, suddenly these cards aren't as useful as they look. But if you take advantage of the second ability of playing them face down, which is they get you 1 conversational point each, they suddenly become 2 free conversation points, because these cards aren't useful for anything outside of just getting the demands out, because unless you get two successes, which is rare in the regular state of things, you are only going to be getting 1 point at max, and at worst, you're going to be making the terror level go up. So once you've got the demands rolled out, these just become 2 easy points. And if you've got 2 points, you should always end up buying these 2 cards, because not only do these cards cost 1 point, so it's 1 for 1, but they also let you re-roll any 1 die if you so desire, and even then, they do count as conversation cards, so you can put them down face down as well, and they count as 1 point each. So you're not even really spending the points, you're just converting them into something that makes them more useful. And then, you've got to choose when to use specific cards, and the most obvious example here is Small Talk, where if you use this at the very end of one of your conversational phases, the worst thing that can happen is that you get a conversation point and the conversation ends. So if you do that exactly at the end of your conversation, you're going to get the best use out of it no matter what. And then you just got to try and figure out what cards in the pile over here are useful, because some are absolutely more useful than others on most occasions. So for example, you've got cards like, say, Sniper Take the Shot and all units get in there. So these 2 cards are kind of the same, but they're also kind of not, because the punishment for failing the 8 card isn't that much different from the punishment for the 7 card. So yeah, Abductor escapes, mission failed, right? But over here, by the time that you're going to get to 7 conversational points, you're not going to have the room to let 2 hostages die for the most part, not to mention getting 2+ on the terror track and ending the conversation. So, as far as I'm concerned, I would always be going for the 8 card over the 7 card, just because the effect is that much more powerful, and if I'm going for this kind of effect anyway, I'm going to want to be boosting the amount of rolls I can take. And speaking of boosting the amount of rolls you can take, we've got 2 cards here. So, an Empty Promise costs 4. I'm Coming in to Talk costs 5. So, an Empty Promise only gives you an extra 2 dice for the next challenge you attempt. I'm Coming in to Talk gives you an extra 2 dice for the entire conversation. So you can play down like 5 more cards if you've got them, and you'll get the better rolls and the better odds with them. And still, the downside to this one is that if you fail it, not only is someone going to die, you're going to have one less dice for whatever it is you choose to do next. Meanwhile, with this one, it's just remove the card from the game. And chances are you're not going to get this card twice, because you only get 10 turns on the Terror deck, right? But there are cards in here that can skip to another Terror card. So it's safer to assume you're only going to get like 7 or 8 turns. So really, why wouldn't you just spend the extra point and go for the one that'll get you more dice overall? And there are just a fair few cards like this that are only really useful situationally, or as something where another plan just isn't going to work, otherwise you're absolutely going to get slaughtered. And as a result, it feels like half of learning Hostage Negotiator is learning the basic strategy, trying to figure out exactly what will be useful where, and then after that it just feels like it comes down to rolling the dice more often than not. There are ways, of course, to increase the amount of dice you have, whether it be trying to keep the hostage taker calm, whether it be using one of those cards up there. And there are also conceding demands, which aren't particularly useful in the early game because speeding up the terror cards, not the best at the beginning. But if you manage to save enough of those points, by the end, you could concede both of them at the same time. So when you're on your final turn, where none of those matter anymore, you can just do both of them at once and get a massive boost off it that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. There are some things that change this up, and again, I'll get to that, but for the 3 base guys in the box, that's pretty much how the strategy works. Always buy them. Reveal the demands so that you're always going to have 2 free cards in here. Know which one of these cards is more effective, and know what order to use them in a relatively simplistic way. To the point where I feel like that if they just put, like, say, in the manual right here, if they put, like, 1 page in the back that was, like, strategy with all of those points I just gave you, most people would be a lot less annoyed with this game and think it was a lot less luck, because I spent my first few games getting absolutely slaughtered until I started figuring out the strategies. But then, there wouldn't be that much else to do or learn, or to improve upon, because once you've got those 4 or 5 tips figured out, these 3 play almost exactly the same. So you'll end up playing the same sort of game every single time. I'm not saying it'll be exactly the same. Some will be a bit more of a nail-biter because of the randomization of the red terror deck. Some will be a bit more iffy because you'll get a different set of demands, or you'll find yourself in a situation where you need to get like 4 hostages out now and no points to do it with. But that always feels like it comes down to luck, whether it be the luck of what ended up in the terror deck, the luck of the dice rolls, or both. And speaking of which, you want to know why I'm using some weird-ass looking dice? The game does actually come with its own dice. The dice are actually quite lovely, but here's the problem with them. I'm pretty sure they're biased. I don't know what it is, but as soon as I took these dice out of the picture and just started using these random dice I've been holding onto for years for no particular reason, I started doing way better. Like, even after I'd figured out all the strategies, I went back to using these dice for a bit, and they were screwing me on the luck. I don't know if it's just me being completely paranoid or not, but genuinely, swap the dice out and see how you do. Sometimes it just works better. But yes, that's kind of my problem with Hostage Negotiator. When you figured out the strategy, which is relatively simple once you get down to the nuts and bolts of the game, a lot of it just comes down to luck. Because you might put together the best strategy. You might have built up 5 dice, which is entirely possible to do, and I've actually done it. And then you might roll all of those dice. They might all turn out to be failures, and the abductor will just get away. Because you can have all the strategy in the world, but this game still has that push your luck element, and if you fail right at the last moment, that's not going to do much for you. And I've also heard some people say that this game is great for its theme, for its atmosphere, and I guess I can kind of agree, but at the same time, I'm just not feeling it on this one, because of just how random it is. And how some of these cards just don't seem to fit the theme. Like, for example, let's just say, Arcanye. Arcanye is the leader of a terrorist group. So when you actually manage to kill off the abductor without saving all of the hostages, a second-in-command comes in, which doesn't make any bloody sense for Donna or Edward. For Kanye, it makes sense, but Edward is just a guy who wants medical care for his son. Donna just wants tenure at her university. So why would they have second-in-command? And some of this flavor text doesn't really work for me as well. Like, for example, small talk. Tell me, do you have family? Edward wants care for his son. Of course he has bloody family. It just doesn't make any sense to me. We're running out of focus there. Need to refill the focus tins. But anyway, as a result, and as a result of just the outright randomness of it all, like, some people, I can see how some people would get into it, but me, I can't put myself in those shoes. I can't find myself just being able to really enjoy the theme in that way. There are games that I absolutely have managed to do so, and I'm hoping to get videos of them up on this channel very soon. I just need to find another $200 bloody. You'll understand what I mean when I actually get the bloody games. But with this game, I just couldn't get it, especially with the way that the purchasing system works. Like, it just feels weird that I don't have access to telling the snipers to go straight in, or just asking for a few more minutes, or just trying an extraction, for that matter. Like, it would make more sense if it was like, there are some things here that I can use to try and have the conversational back and forth, and then at any time, I can try and pull an extraction, because you think that would be the thing I could do, but they've merged them both into this one gameplay system, and it just doesn't work in that way for me personally. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any fun. Once I had started figuring out the strategy, and once I had started eking out some of those wins, it was enjoyable, but then once I had all the strategies figured out and it started becoming relatively repetitive, I was just like, nah, I'm not going for this. And that leads me to my final problem with this game. I did say that all of these guys are really similar, and this is something that the expansions really do take care of, because they add new mechanics, they add different effects, they change the balance of the strategies and the cards, they remove some, they add some in, and as a result, it ends up becoming a more interesting game because you've got more to deal with. The balance is a bit more on multiple angles, and so you've got a bit more to think about. And I'm not saying that just because of like someone else's reviews and something like that. I actually own 3 of the expansions. But this game just kind of feels like it was meant for expansions, and not in the sense that they put out a game, it did really well, so they started throwing out as many expansions as they could. I mean that they made this system with the idea of making expansions in mind to make it more interesting. At least that's how it looks in my point of view. I'm happy to admit I'm wrong on this one, if I turn out to be, but yeah, I feel like the game could have done so much better if, like, Kanye as a base one, cool. Edward as a slightly different take on the same thing to move up to, where you have to pay more attention to the terror meter. Yeah, that would work for me. But then replace Donna with something else. Like, replace Donna with Gonzalo here, who's the bus driver, or the well, probably not the cultists, but just replace her with something that also changes up the rules to give you a better idea of where they could take this system. Instead, with the 3 that you get in the box, it feels like you've only got like two different versions of the same game and one slightly different version of the same game. If they had included even like one of the expansion people in here, that really changes things up. I probably would have been a much bigger fan of it, just in the sense of, this is where we can go with it, are you interested in more? But in this case, it ends up being everything feels the bloody same, so I don't know how the expansions could really help things out. And the only reason I have the expansions is because they were going really cheap at the time that I bought the game too, so I just picked up a few of them thinking, oh, these will be fun to like slide in and have a go with, and these end up being the most fun thing to do in the bloody game. So, there you go. It's a decent system, and I don't hate it, but I do think that once you've learned the strategy, and once you've gone through that like second third of your gameplay experience, where you're starting to figure things out, you're starting to eke out those wins, and the games are a little bit more exciting. Once you get past that point, the game starts to get a bit repetitive, and then it starts holding out the hand for the money. Like, money please, here you go, 18 cards per pack for like $10, which is just bloody ridiculous. So, unless you're willing to spend a lot of money to get into Hostage Negotiator, I wouldn't recommend you at least start with this box. Maybe Crime Wave is better. I wouldn't know. I don't plan on buying it. But what is here in the base content is just you'll be done with it in a couple of hours, and it won't leave you with much of an idea of how the expansions work. And the expansions can be exciting. Like the bus driver, he adds an entirely new location deck and a bus that you need to stop in order to keep him from draining your conversational points. There's the cultists, who will add some new conversation tactics, and they have an entire deck of people who count as both the hostages and the hostage takers at the same time. It's a really interesting trick. And then you've got Incognito, who you can't capture until you do a little bit of bomb disarming, which involves rolling some dice outside of the regular stuff after you've saved enough hostages. It's a really clever little set of takes on the formula. But they all cost like 15 bucks Australian normally, which is like 10 bucks US. And I don't think they're worth that. So there you go. Maybe if they release like a Crime Wave box that has all the expansions built in for a way discounted price because they don't have to manufacture all those plastic packs, then maybe I'd be able to say go for it, but even then it might be a bit too expensive for my tastes. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.